Oh, it's live. I guess we'll get started. Welcome to Workplace Education Manitoba Success Skills Unwrapped webinar series. This session today is brought to you in acknowledgement by Workplace Education Manitoba, and the funding is being provided by the Government of Canada and the Manitoba government. Today we have Mercy Oluwafemi. Can you help me with that one, Mercy? Mercy,
yes,
how well?
Correct.
I was correct. Thank you very much. She is a world adventurer who is passionate about leadership, philanthropy, and a catalyst social change. She has delivered leadership programs and she has spoken at TEDx. She holds a bachelor's of science in psychology from the University of Manitoba and has earned multiple change management and project management certifications. Mercy is passionate about creating lasting mentorship and networking opportunities for Manitoba's youth and creating space for inspiration, connection, and knowing sharing. Beyond her professional pursuits, Mercy is an advocate for fitness, an ardent reader, and an avid volunteer. In her spare time, you'll often find her planning for her next travel adventure. I've had the opportunity to meet Mercy through Leadership Winnipeg, and I'm very happy that we have her here to present to us. She's going to talk about how to engage youth in Manitoba Workforce. I'm going to transfer the stage to yourself.
Thank you, Donna, and good afternoon, everyone. It's really lovely to be here on this Friday afternoon here in Winnipeg, and thank you for joining us today to talk everything about youth, how to connect with youth, how to develop them, but also really best practices on how to engage them in the workforce. So as Donna mentioned, my name is Mercy Oluwafemi. I am a Nigerian-Canadian woman. I've lived in Canada for most of my life, and most of that has actually been here in Winnipeg. On the next slide, it just shows my face. I do tend to change my hair quite often. That's something a lot of people know about me. But more importantly, I have worked in the nonprofit sector and public sector for over 10 years. And a lot of that has actually been working specifically in the youth engagement field. So really everything from youth empowerment to youth development and youth leadership, that's really all I do. And, I'm very lucky enough to be in the space where every year I sort of train, mentor, and manage over 500 youths, specifically here in Manitoba. So I always say I'm sort of an expert in youth. I'm very familiar with the youth population in our province here. And I'm really passionate about connecting youth to opportunities, but also connecting opportunities to youth and bridging those gaps in between. And as I mentioned, today I'm very excited to be sharing with you about how to better engage our youth in the workforce, specifically in Manitoba. So today, really, what we'll be talking about is all about youth. I'll share some demographics and some data that we have right now around our youth population. I'll share a little bit around some of the trends around the job market, how that's affecting youth, some of the challenges that they do face in the workplace, and some strategies, obviously, based on why you hear, some strategies to bridge those gaps and some of the ways to really help them connect better to the workforce. So as I go along, just please feel free to go ahead in the chats, just tell us where you're joining us from and what is one thing that you're hoping to take away from the webinar today. And also, just out of curiosity, what is something that is inspiring you to join us today? So before I start talking about youth and really, talking about youth in the workforce, I think it's actually crucial to set some context. Youth is a term that we actually use quite loosely. So whenever I'm talking to people and they refer to youth, I actually usually get them to clarify what they mean by youth. Sometimes people are talking about youth and they're talking about an individual from age 13 to 18. And sometimes, I work with organizations and their focus is actually on youth from age 13 up until 35, which is sort of, more in the adult or young adult category. And biologically, it can actually be hard to define when one leaves childhood and when one enters into the phase of youth before transitioning into adulthood. In the last couple of years, a more modern way of thinking about youth and defining them is sort of thinking about them in terms of their characteristics as opposed to their specific age. But for the sake of our conversation today, we're actually going to focus on youths between the age of 15 to 24 years old. So that's sort of Stats Canada's definition of who a youth is in Canada. So someone between 15 to 24 years old. So a lot of my conversation today will really just focus around that age group. I thought this was quite interesting enough, and I would like to share with you. So here in Canada, the youth population is actually one of the largest it's ever been in the last decades. And according to Stats Canada here in Manitoba, so this is a number from the last recorded value in December, we have 177,000 youths here in Manitoba. That's a lot of people, 177,000 young people between the age of 15 to 28. And also, interestingly enough, Manitoba actually has the youngest population in all of Canada. So 39% of the people who live in our province here are actually under the age of 30 years old, which I find really fascinating. And when it comes to our labor force, my next slide shows the amount of participation rates that we have. So 64.5% participation rate is what we have right now as of December when it comes to youth working in our workforce. So what does this mean? This is essentially anyone between the age of 15 to 24 years old are either actively working or looking for work at a rate of 64.5%. That basically equals 100,000 plus youths who are either in the workforce or looking for work. And I think this is actually really interesting for our conversation today. Because that actually is a lot of youths. That's a lot of population that we can tap into that are either sort of engaged or there, and we can really help them to be prepared to enter the workforce. The next slide shows the trajectory of our youth population in Manitoba. So this is sort of a data that started collating from Stats Canada since the pandemic. So from just before 2020 to 2023, the end of 2023. And this sort of shows the trajectory of our youth population in our province. So if you're a data fanatic like I am, you might notice the sort of dip there in the middle of 2021 and the end of 2022. So just interestingly enough, we had the greatest interprovincial migration in the last 20 years. So this is people basically moving from Manitoba to somewhere else in Canada. And a lot of that were parents. So parents moving with kids, but also university graduates that are sort of under that 24 years old that have graduated university and moving to a different province in search of a better opportunity. But I think what's actually really interesting is at the beginning of 2023, because of immigration, that number sort of picked up. And right now, the standing theory is actually that trajectory is going to continue to increase over the next few years. So this is also not just the population in our city, in our province, but the population specifically around youth in Manitoba. I think that's great for our conversation today because, it means we're not in shortage of youths. We have them. And also based on the fact that I shared that 64.5% are actively trying to participate in the workforce, that's an interesting dilemma for us to have. So I did wanted to share a little bit about some of the expectations that youths might have when it comes to the workforce. I think more so than generations before, youths are expecting to work in a more casual setting. They also value work-life integration a lot more than work-life balance. So this idea of work and life being more integrated together and not so separate anymore, that's sort of an expectation they hold. And that also means that they are actually more likely to bring their whole self to work, rather than compartmentalizing different identities and keeping them sort of separate. They're more likely to bring their whole self to their workplace. They're also more likely to bring media, to bring technology, sort of integrate that into their workspaces. And also quite interesting is they're also more likely to job hop. So this is the idea of staying with an employer. They're less likely to stay with an employer beyond 4 years. But however, they are more likely to stay if the culture and the fit is right. Anyone between age 15 to 25 will typically have different priorities that is going on. So they might still be in school or just finishing school. They might be in internships, looking for internships. A lot of them might be volunteering. They might be in sports, different extracurriculars or familiar obligations. A lot of them will have different competing priorities like adults do. And they would typically expect a workplace to be sensitive to that and to really understand that. They're also more sensitive to corporate social responsibility. So a lot of us can attest to, social media and media just bridging the gap and making us feel a lot more connected in general. And because of that, a youth will typically know what's going on in Asia or Africa or South America, just with the click of a finger. And because of that, they're so much more in tuned with the expectations and different things that is going on in other parts of our planet. So they would typically care more about how we're treating the environment, about human rights, about global affairs. And when they come into the workplace, those are expectations that they would love to see. So what are some of the responsibilities in terms of corporate social responsibility that the workplace is holding? They are a lot more vocal than past generations. So if you've, maybe worked with youth, you might be able to attest to this. They will typically tell you what you're thinking, as long as they feel safe to be able to do so, they will share their thoughts and, they're just more vocal in general. And last but not least, they want fun. I think more important for them when choosing a workplace, they want somewhere where they, like I said, they can bring the whole side to work. It's less, it's more casual and in general, just more fun in general. But having said all of that, in terms of some of the expectations they have, there are, however, some challenges that they also quite hold when it comes to the workforce. And a lot of us can, we all know, we've heard about the paradox of entry-level opportunity requirements. So some entry-level positions may require experience, but that in turn creates a paradox where a young job seeker might they might struggle to find positions that allow them to gain those experiences that they actually need. They also might have a skills mismatch. So they might have gone to school for many, many years and acquired some skills through education, but actually those skills might actually be different from what employers are looking for. So there's sort of a skills mismatch there. They might also have limited experience. So even those that have some of those skills that employers are looking for might not have a lot of practical work experience, which obviously makes it quite challenging for them to be able to compete with other more experienced candidates. They also do have as I mentioned, the challenge of balancing priorities, their education, their work. They have that challenge going on for them as well. They also have the challenge of job insecurity. So a lot of 15 to 24-year-old will be either looking for temporary or part-time employment, especially if they're in that 15 to 20-year gap. And because that's sort of common, employers are less likely to want to take a risk on someone who might be staying with them temporarily. So youth might typically just be having trouble finding temporary or part-time opportunity. They might also have a limited networking opportunity. So a lot of them might not quite know where to go for network. They might have limited access or even knowledge of where some of those networking opportunities that are crucial for career growth where they are. So they might have problems and challenges navigating those networks. And unfortunately, young people still face discrimination or bias based on their age. Many times I've spoken to youth and I've had them talk to me about, even in the workplace, they're not taken seriously because of how young they look or, their age. And because of that, that's actually preventing them from receiving other opportunities that other people in the workplace might be receiving. Some youths also do struggle a lot more than others based on their background. So especially those with less formalized education, Indigenous youths, recent immigrant youths, or youths living with disabilities, those are youths that are so much more likely to have a greater need for challenges in the workplace. And as I mentioned, other priorities as well that might also be competing with their work. So despite all of that, they have expectations, they have a lot of challenge. Why youths? Why even consider them? And why would you think about having youths, especially because I just mentioned some of the different ways in which having a youth might perhaps not be beneficial to your organization. And the first is that they bring fresh perspective. They are creative. Oftentimes, they have fresh ideas and innovative perspective to the workplace. They are creative thinking, and that can actually help you in your organization in terms of problem solving and development of new strategies. Usually, when an organization employs more people, it also promotes a culture of diversity, and that actually helps to tap into a wider range of talent, a wider range of perspective. Young workers are a lot more adaptable and agile. They are a lot more open to change. They have a lot of tech savvy skills because they're usually so much more familiar with the different tools and platforms that are available in terms of technology. That sort of allows them to possess a lot of digital and technological skills that is really needed in today's workspace. And one of the reasons I really love working with youth is their enthusiasm. They have so much energy that is actually oftentimes very contagious. And usually when they're committed to something, they bring such a positive attitude that can actually contribute to a dynamic and a motivated work environment. Another reason why you might consider youth is their eagerness to learn. They are very quick learners. They can usually rapidly acquire new skills as needed. As I mentioned, they bring diverse perspective that can also really enhance a lot of different problem-solving skills based on the fact that they are also eager to learn. And this is one aspect where it's not quite often visible to people in terms of why youths might be a better idea, but they are actually quite cost efficient. So it's cost-wise, it is actually more efficient to hire a young person because they will typically might have a lower salary expectation as opposed to someone who's been in the workforce for a while. And also when you hire a young talent, you can develop, you can mentor them, you can allow them to sort of, be the future leaders within the company. And as I said, if the culture and the fit is right, they are actually more likely to stay beyond that 4 years that we know. So when we think about the expectations that youth have, the challenges that they have, thinking about our conversation today about how do you actually engage them? So, how can we bridge that gap between the expectations that they have, the challenges that they face? What are some of the ways in which you can actually bridge the gap between those two? Well, one of those is to provide flexible options. So these are sort of ways in which you can get youths more engaged in the workplace, providing flexible options that suits their priorities. If we go to the next slide, next slide, thanks. Great, thank you. So flexible options, it's one of the ways in which you can engage them in the Manitoba workforce. Basically embracing flexible hours, thinking of remote work options. I hear from employers all the time that, when it comes specifically to remote job options, they don't want to offer that to a youth because they're sort of, unsure how to trust the person by themselves. The person might require more supervision and they're not quite sure that that's something they're able to do. And I always say, trust them, trust youths. A lot of them would have at some point, either during even the pandemic, they would have had to learn how to work alone. And that is a skill that a lot of youths have now that a lot of us more older folks didn't have back in the day. The idea of just this remote, stay motivated while working remotely. So I say always trust them, offer that as an option if that's something that you're able to do. And obviously, just like you would do with any other employee, mentorship and support is still required, but that's still something that can be achieved in the virtual world. Work-life integration, I talked a little bit about this, but also understanding the gradual shifts to that is something that work-life balance might be slightly different for a youth that you might be thinking of engaging, and they might actually consider work-life integration as their own perfect work environment. The gig economy is something that we've recently started picking up on in the last 2 or 3 years now, and that's sort of more people in general, but specifically more youths getting into side business. So side business around social media. They might be an influencer. There might be food drivers at e-commerce. They might be doing food delivery, selling stuff on Amazon, as an example. And even though some of the youths will obviously be looking for employment option, some of them might also be involved in other side gigs, either because of interest, because, of luck, but also sometimes for financial reason as well. So to be able to engage them in the workforce, an employer needs to sort of understand that. And that sort of ties back into what are priorities and really help and encourage them. Youth also love to be engaged in decision making. Social research has told us that people, but also youth specifically, feel more engaged when they are actively involved in decision making, especially when that decision is being made by an authoritarian figure or sort of an adult. So essentially, including youth in the decision-making processes, seek their input, seek their initiative, make them feel valued and feel connected, ask for their feedback on whatever it is you're doing within your organization. Another crucial way to involve them is providing clear career pathways. So that's establishing clear career pathways and opportunities for advancements within your workspace and even the sector. So essentially, if a youth is going to come into your workplace, they should know that if they're going to stay there, that in a position that isn't just temporary, that there is a clear career path, a clear advancement opportunity. And even if a youth is only in your organization for the summer, they need to also be able to see very clearly what are some of the ways in which they will be able to advance in the limited time that they are within you. So providing a roadmap for career progression, for progression in general can motivate them to invest and also stay longer with your organization as well. I've talked about mentorship and development opportunities, but a lot of young people really don't, they don't really know how to connect with opportunities that are available or how to get in within doors. Some of us adults, even we struggle with that, but we all really know that sometimes when it comes to career pathways and even just workforce in general, it is really all about your networks. So providing them with mentorship and development opportunities, connecting them to people within your organization or outside the organization, people or resources that can really help in knowledge transfer, in skills development, things that can help them sort of feel a little bit more integrated into the workforce. One of the ways I know a lot of employers do this might sort of be, providing specific roadmap around what's available within their organization, what's available in the sector, but also how a youth might be able to bridge the gap by either reaching out to someone else or a volunteering opportunity as an example. So some of that is just a conversation or, just a willingness to engage them beyond the work that they are really there to do. If we can go to the next slide. Another ways in which we can also engage them is providing opportunities for continuous learning and skills development. And that sort of ties a little bit into mentorship. So, that can be a little bit more formalized things around training programs. It can be workshops. There's lots of different materials online that are actually typically free, that can be things around how to be professional in a workspace, how to navigate technology in a workspace, things how to have a better communication. LinkedIn is one I really always refer a lot of youth to, because LinkedIn Learning has a lot of different opportunities that is really around getting people, but also youth specifically, more engaged in the workforce. So giving them access to different types of tools that will really help them to enhance their skills and their knowledge. Mental health is also a big one. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, mental health concerns in Canadian youth specifically have been the highest it's been, just as a result of COVID. And, although more youth and I think more people in general, they are much more open to talking about mental health today than maybe our parents and previous generations, they also want to see that conversation extending to the workspace. So, you can engage them by having those conversations about mental wellness, providing support, providing services that can sort of help them and support their mental wellness. That helps them sort of feel valued and feel engaged. And just like any other employer that you might have, recognize them, reward their contribution, and reward their achievements, no matter how small. I think a lot, usually when a youth who hasn't had a lot of professional experience is rewarded and recognized, they see themselves a lot more valued in the workspace, and that actually encourages them, gives them the skills they need to keep looking for more and to be more engaged in general. And on the last on there is being inclusive and providing a positive work culture. So, being inclusive and a positive work culture that values diversity, that welcomes different perspective, and inclusive environments that helps the youth feel more accepted, more valued. Interestingly enough, here in Manitoba, 17% of new immigrants are youth. That's a big number. So thinking about how does cultural competency play out in your workplace? How are you making, those 17% of new immigrants that are youth, how are they feeling more included? And how do you yourself as an employer model that inclusivity? Another thing is you might also want to reassess your hiring strategies. So think about what sort of processes you have in place that might be a barrier to a youth. So for instance, are you asking more experience than the job needs? Are you asking for more time commitments? What are some of those barriers that you're even putting on a job application that would instantly filter out to youth if it wasn't there? So thinking about what exactly do you need in the job and how can you make that job, if it's a role that a youth can fill, how can a youth who's looking at a job application for that be more attracted to that? And last but not least, just like anyone else, you want to obviously cultivate a positive work culture and a culture that values teamwork, a culture that values creativity and open communication. And obviously, as we know, based on social research, that typically tends to lead to a higher job conclusion, job satisfaction, and job engagement. So on the next slide, there's a circle on the left there with 68% of it being in yellow and 32% in green. And this is a circle from the Manitoba labor market that they did about a year ago now. And this is a forecast for the next 3 years. So essentially, based on the forecast, 32% of new jobs will be coming from economic growth, just growth in general. However, I think that's more interestingly enough, 6 to 8% of new jobs would actually be to replace retiring workers in Manitoba. And that's obviously would be a lot more younger generations, maybe not typically the 15 to 24-year-old filling that 68%, but there will be a big shift towards more younger people, towards recruiting for more younger people to fill in that 68% gap that we are going to be having in the next 3 years. On the right-hand side on there also shows a chart that is showing how the job vacancies in Manitoba. So in the last 9 years, we have had a lot more jobs than we have had, and that's obviously still increasing. The last bar on there is just from the first quarter in 2023. So we're having this situation where we have a lot of youths, as I showed before in the graph. We are also having a lot more jobs, and we know that here in Manitoba, a lot of our retiring workers will start to fade out in the next 3 years, and that would be a shift towards more younger people being recruited. So the future is bright. It's bright for employers. It's bright for youths here in Manitoba. There's a lot more jobs than they've been before, and there's a lot of youths who are also willing and they're able to work. So it's really quite up to individuals and organizations who are looking to engage youths that, to pose the question to themselves of if you're ready. Are you ready to actually receive those youths? Are you in the space to consider some of those challenges that they're facing? And are you willing to consider some of the things you could do to help them sort of bridge those gaps? So my question before I sort of finish here is sort of, are you ready? Are you ready to receive those youth? And what are some of the practices that you can start implementing now going forward that is better going to help encourage youth and engage them better in your specific workforce? Thank you.
I have to unmute myself. Thank you very much. That was, as you said, that was a lot. That was an amazing amount of information and ideas for us all to take away. I have a question for you. Out of you mentioned there's going to be 32% of new jobs, like kind of new jobs being created. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes. So yeah, 32% based on economic growth.
Yes. And do we know what those jobs might be, or do we know where industries they might be in? Or
yeah, so a lot of them. Thank you for asking that. That's again, I was so fascinated by that because that's new data that is coming out, and that's a huge amount.
Yes.
So a lot of it is based on industries that already exist right now, but economic growth specifically within new industries. So AI is quite a big, it's a big thing coming up right now. So AI technology and how that's working. So, thinking of, as an example, engineering. How does AI fit into engineering? How does AI fit into teaching? So that's a huge portion of that already. There's also the idea of remote workspaces. So, what does that actually look like? Remote workspaces in themselves are bridging a new economic developments that we've not had before. So there's a lot more platforms for remote teaching. There's a lot more security being, thinking about it from an IT perspective. There's a lot more going on from a security perspective, specifically because of the shift towards remote work. So a lot of it is actually already industries that exist, but a lot more like a new development within each specific industries based on what we're looking at right now in the new world, as I call it.
Oh, yeah. Excellent.
But yeah,
excellent.
It's very fascinating. It's something I do wish to, like, the data is obviously, it's only about a year old now. So there's still a lot of research going into that specifically around what that looks like. And this is only forecasted to 2027. So what's going to happen? And, 2027 is also 3 years away. There's a lot that can happen in 3 years, as we've seen. So that would also be fascinating to quite, be on track with that. But I think the idea is just that there's a lot of new jobs that are going to be coming and are coming up. And I think that's great news for a lot of employers, but youths as well.
And I've also seen in other things where those companies are trying to get to meet the youth as well, right? I don't want to say the incorrect industry, so I'm just not going to use any specific industry, but I do know there's industries because I'll mess that up. So I know there's specific industries here and through other volunteer work that I do where they're actually coming and they're trying to find ways that they know they need to get into the schools, because when the youth comes up, it's like you said, 3 years, right? Like 1,000 days is not that far away, right? Approximately 1,000 days isn't far away. So I have a question. Where do you think the work-life integration versus work-life balance is coming from? What's causing that?
I think it's a generational shift.
Okay.
That is coming out from this, we're just so much more connected than we've been before. And the idea of the West being in a bubble, it's not so much as the case as 10, 15 years ago. So, a lot of youths are really considering, this is how other cultures, this is what work looks like. This is, I know youths who went to Europe and lived there and worked there for a little bit, and they came back and, for them, the work life was so different based on how Europeans do work and how we North Americans do that. So I think a lot of it is a generational difference. A lot of it is cultural, based on the fact that we're just seeing so much more of the world. A lot of youths are much more, as I said, they're more vocal, so they want to question things a little bit more. Sort of ask why, why do I have to be here for nine to five when I could do do my work at the
Yes.
same amount of time and not be there. And I think a lot of us adults too are sort of there getting to that question, but for youths, it's just much more forefront. So they might also, as I said, have different things going on in their life as well. And this idea of wanting to separate different identities that they might possess, that's
Yes.
not something that they really follow anymore based on my conversations with them. And a lot of them will come to work, they will wear their fedoras, they'll wear their cultural
Yes.
outfits, they will play their song during lunch hour. They don't sort of see this door of life and work being as separate and much more integrated. And just because a lot of us are doing so much on the go right now, we have our smartphones, we have our laptops, they will be working from home, and things naturally that just makes things a little bit more integrated as opposed to balance. I think the idea behind the difference in those two things, balance sort of it says work is great, life is great, but let's keep those two things separate.
Yes.
This new concept of integration is let's merge those two things, and how can we make them work together?
Yes. Yeah, no, I find it very, very fascinating in many different fronts, but I could go on that topic, but we have a couple of questions from individuals. So I'm going to show it to you now.
What supports or strategies for recruiting and retaining? I was actually hoping someone would ask this. So thank you so much for asking that specifically around newcomer youths. So I did mention 14% of newcomers in Manitoba youths, and that's a huge portion. So that's 14 of them are between 15 to 24 years old. So some of the strategies are really around connecting directly with some of the supports they might have. So one, you might, if a newcomer is in schools, what are some of the strategies the schools have in place that you as an employer can actually come in and piggyback on? So a lot of the time, a school might have a strategy or a lunchtime program that is really focused around getting, maybe an ESL student really knowing about workplace here. So you as an employer, what are some of the ways you can talk and have a conversation with some of those schools on how you can speak to them? A lot of schools will have career fairs maybe once or twice every every school year. So maybe you're getting into some of that, having direct conversation with those newcomers. Here in Manitoba, we also have a huge focus on our newcomers, and there are so many different social organizations that exist that are really tied to newcomers, who's providing services for newcomers. So I'm thinking of Welcome Immigrant. I'm thinking of Welcome, thinking of Needs, different other organizations that are really just there specifically that would also have a lot of youth-focused programs as well. So, getting, again, it might be a conversation of, can I speak to the youth program coordinator on HACOM and actually ask about what are some of the things that their youths are talking about when it comes to getting into the career workforce? So it's really all around meeting newcomer youths where they already are, where are the services that they are already into, what are the services that they're already doing, and then having conversations with, people who are providing those services, those youths themselves, and connecting them together.
Well, I think the World Health Organization talks about when we start to look and finding ways to connect with people, we need to go to where they are. We can't expect them to come to us. I think it's one of, I remember taking that in a humanitarian course, and it was something that really caught my attention because we kind of expect people to come to us. And if I was to tie that into, part of this is skills for success. And we talk a lot about all the things you've talked about, which is problem solving, creativity, communication. When you have different people working together, you have the youth, you have people that are, a couple of decades in the workforce and people that are maybe 3 or 4 decades in the workforce. How do we come together? Do you know what I mean? Like, what are some of those tips, for once that youth is in the workplace, so they actually feel like they belong, they have that sense of belonging, which is so important for them to show up every day.
Yeah, I think that's a question that applies regardless of your age group. Like if you're getting to
it does, right? It does. Yes.
So I'm going to share my example. One of the example, I when I was a youth. I still think of myself as a youth because we still think of under 35 as youth. But when I was a youth, my very first workplace, one of the things that they did was actually take me to a board meeting. So
Oh,
I remember, like, I can still very clearly picture that day. I was 16 years old, working in behind my mentor at the time to this boardroom, and I always reference that day as one of the like biggest highlights of my professional life. So
no
specific
way.
activity like that, where
Yep.
someone within the organization actually just takes a day out of their workspace to actually say, you know what, I go into board meetings all the time, but I'm going to bring you along with me to the next
Yeah.
meeting and actually involve you. And I don't actually remember if I introduced myself or talked about it, but I just remember the feeling of feeling included as a 16-year-old, with all those board members in a room.
Yes.
So specific actions like that, things like, just making space for them, wanting to hear about what they have going on in their life.
Mm-hmm.
I had a youth that I was working very closely with last year. And even though, I've worked in this space for 10 years, I'm still always learning with them. And from that sort of mentorship relationship last year, one of the biggest thing for him, the person I was working with, was sort of, me taking a day, 5 minutes out of every single day and wanting to chat about something that had nothing to do with work. That was very important for him. So, asking about what he had for dinner, or asking about, like, what's new on TikTok, and having
Yep.
conversations around that. But,
Yep.
giving them that sort of opportunity to share some part of their life that has nothing to do with work, and actually actively listening, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's so many different other examples, but those two things, I think, just it's really just around creating time and giving them the opportunity to be part of your workspace. Things like also setting up a physical work environment for them at work, even if it's a cubicle, but something they can call their own, that they can say,
Mm-hmm.
this is my workspace, this is it.
Yes.
Something they can showcase their fellow colleagues or parents, that I go to work and this is where I sit. And things like that they can hone and call their own also really makes an impact.
Mm-hmm. That makes me think about the comment that you shared, that in one of your circles was the idea that the youth want to be really involved in that decision making.
Yeah.
And our biases are not all of ours, but there is this idea that they only want to be on their phones connecting and talking, but understanding that we need to get past that bias, right? Our own bias of the youth, and how is that impacting it? So
Yeah.
that's just maybe
Yeah,
when you were talking, made me think of those connection points.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it for us is really defining what we think of when we think of youth. And
Mm-hmm.
they're not people that, yes, they might be on their smartphones, and those might be conversations you actually need to have with them around professionalism, but giving them that trust that they are willing to accept that and change
Mm-hmm.
behaviors. Those are really crucial skills, I think, for employers, but also really knowing that you don't just want to dismiss them right out of the gate. There might be a lot of mentorship. There might be a lot of sort of push and pull. But I
Yep.
think the reward at the end of the day is always so much more worth it. And they like, if once they fill in something, they will be in it 100%. Like I said, the enthusiasm and energy they always bring in
Mm-hmm.
is always so crucial to a workplace. And it really, just like in terms of economic stability, it drives economic stability because of youth involvement.
Oh yeah, and their belief that they want to work. Maybe right now they're working a few hours, but if they're enjoying those few hours a week, and then the momentum. I remember on one of the boards I sat on a few years ago, we actually brought a youth on, and there was a huge debate around whether or not that person would have any voting rights. And I'm like, if the youth is going to come on, they have to have full rights. They have to have full choice. And if we want them to be able to vote on a budget, we need to teach them and mentor them so that they are able to make a vote of yay or nay, or ask good questions. So I love the fact that you brought in that volunteer or board meetings, because we sometimes forget that the youth can sit very easily at those tables and be as successful. Just curiosity, here's a question. Let's see if I can get this one to work. Yes. How can employers meet the youth digital expectations?
I think this is different now than it would have been 4 years ago. Like your digital
Yes.
expectation now, everyone is digital.
Yes.
even here in Manitoba, almost 100. I think it's about 99.98% of youths in our province are using are connected digitally, so using a cell phone or whatever that might be. And in terms of expectations that they might have, that might be I need to have my phone on me when I'm at work. I need to stay connected to my social media, to my families, to my friends. I need to post everything I do on social media. Those are sort of some expectations that they might have that they're actually even bringing and carrying from school that might stay with them through the workplace. So I think as an employer, first of all, you need to know what the reality around social media or digital expectation is in your workspace and communicate that. If it's, there is no digital, if we don't use phones here, then that's something you need to ask. That's a contract you need to have with the youths, for instance. If it's around, you can use your phone, but only at lunchtime. Those are conversations that can be had with them, but also reframing that not as an insolent youth, but a youth that needs to grow and develop in a professional workspace.
It's actually interesting though, because my son shared the other day, he said, I can't believe how fast some people can type on their phones, but they can't actually type on a keyboard. And just recently this morning, someone said the youth, in a different session, someone made a comment about, being expected to be able to print off their phones. And I have to tell you, I'm not a youth, but I expect to be able to print off my phone too. I do not know why I would need to go and chart up my, so it's an interesting conversation to really say what is we think about digital being these ideas of technology and influencing things, but really the amount of tech digital that they know how to use that can really enhance the workplace is phenomenal. Okay, we got a couple of questions here. Let's see. Let's try this one.
What is driving youths towards social responsibility when making employment decisions, and how can workplaces ensure they are meeting the expectation of the socially conscious group? Sorry, I'm just reading this out loud. I'm not sure if everyone is able to see the questions. So what is driving youths towards social responsibility? It's this, like I said, the idea that they are connected. They're so much more connected than they were before, but also
now I hit it. Don't worry. I hit the wrong button. My apologies.
So yeah, they're so much more connected before, but also, I'm going to pick up climate change as an example. Youths are so much more curious about what we are doing with our world, because for them, they will be the one living here in 50, 70 years down the line. So they are much more curious about what the impacts then, what we're doing today, how is going to impact them, because they are our future. So because of that is influencing some of the conversations that they're having with their colleagues, the type of jobs they're looking for, the way in which they might be living their life. They're considering some of the social responsibility things. Can you put the question back up? I just forgot the second part there.
I will. Yes, for sure.
How can workspaces ensure they are meeting the expectations of the socially conscious group? That's a really good question. So I'm, as someone who works in the nonprofits right now, that's big for me. And I always advocate for, an employer, regardless of what industry they are in, to be socially conscious, because really we are contributing to the economy. We're living on this earth. A lot of us are people here. So we really needs to be socially conscious, not just because we want to involve youth, but really to be global citizens and to be better. To be better people, essentially. So some of the ways, might be just having a conversation with your board around what are some of the issues that people in your organization are actually passionate about, and how can you actually leverage on that as an organization. Maybe you're working in a specific industry, but you're not quite vocal about a specific social issue. What are some of the ways you can bring that? So thinking about climate change, thinking about human rights, what are some of those different things that might not be part of the day-to-day life within your organization that you as an organization can actually start looking into when it comes into being socially conscious? Because, it's from a PR perspective, that does look good for you as an organization. You attract more young people, but also just make you better.
I have another question for you.
Love the questions. What type of intervention activities are carried out when newcomer youth being mentored feel stuck? Is there a plan to reach more newcomer youths, especially those in high school? I'm not quite sure what type of if that person can give a little bit more clarification on what they mean by the stock, sort of what's happening when the newcomer mentions being stuck, and maybe I can sort of answer that question when I receive that clarification.
Carried out when, what would stuck mean to you? What might be, if the individual could put a comment, that's great. But if not, what might be some examples of feeling stuck? Like feeling stuck would mean I'm in a job and I can't, even though I've applied for 20 jobs,
Yeah.
or I've been applying for jobs for 3 months, I still not getting any, I'm not getting any feedback. I'm not even getting a yes or a no, right?
Yeah, no. In my perspective, when I would hear you saying feel stuck, there might be either the skills mismatch that we talked about, where they've gone to school for 3-4 years and they're having difficulty. Yes, they're having difficulty finding a job, and sort of saying, I went to school, I have all of this skills and knowledge, but I can't find specific job. And some of the ways it can really just be, especially here in Manitoba, there's a lot of resource out there around resume writing, around how to look for jobs specifically. What are some of the ways you can actually leverage AI to help you when you're in your job search? So connecting us specific youths with those type of resources could be a way to bridge the gap with the difficulty that they are facing, but also really trying to understand what they mean by that. So is it coming from a cultural competence perspective? Are they feeling that there's some sort of bias going on, and how can you sort of address that? Are they feeling they're not being heard in the different conversations that they are having? There could be so many different difficulties, as I call them, going on when they might feel sort of stuck or unmotivated when it comes to the workspace. So trying to understand that, if you're lucky enough to be connected directly with them, and as an employer providing those spaces and resources. One thing I think I mentioned briefly, but I didn't really emphasize on, is that those entry barriers. So many times organizations is like, we're looking for youth, we want to recruit youth, and then I take a look at their job description, and there's so many different things that a youth would look at that and automatically say, I can apply for that because that doesn't fit. But in reality, that's just a template the employers used, as opposed to actually tailoring that job and removing some of those barriers like that. So looking at some of those strategies around, what does your job description look like? If you're actually willing and looking for a youth, are there some things or some lines within those hiring strategies that might perhaps turn someone away and maybe make them not even apply for a job, for example?
There's so much out there. They do that to adults too, right? You know what I mean? And we can see through this. We can see a little bit more from our experiences, right? I mean, adults have the same struggles. I do wish they would just even consider the way that they interview people. Do you know what I mean? Like, make it more friendly. You know what I mean? Just the whole concept of walking into a big room and all of that just overwhelms the majority of people. It's just a very interesting space.
The accessibility piece is big. Absolutely. It's, you want to interview a youth. Do you need 4 people in a room, or can 1 or 2 people do that? Right.
Yeah.
So things like that.
Yes. Anything else that comes to mind for you? I have one more question here, but I think.
No, just the youths are ready. I think it's quite fascinating, just in terms of some of the data I shared around, how many youths we have, how much jobs we also have here in the city, but somehow youths don't find jobs. Employers are not quite reaching the youths that they want. So, it's finding, I think for both parties, it's doing a little bit more work beyond maybe what the norm has been in terms of reaching each other.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the youth are ready, what you're saying, but it's almost like, are the employers ready?
Yeah. Like, in a good the century. We need to get to the century to in terms of some of the processes that that we have internally as well, that are maybe they were conducive 50 years ago, might not be great for a 16, 17-year-old looking for a job today.
Yes.
And I shared the idea of job hopping. I think that's quite interesting data also in the last 10 years, just around the idea of young people not wanting to stay at a job beyond 4 years.
4 years.
But the caveat there is actually that the research is saying yes, beyond 4 years, but they will actually stay longer if the culture, if the fit is right. And what that means is if they feel like they belong, if they feel like their work actually makes a difference, whatever industry they might work in. And the pay is also quite, there's something to be said about what they are paid as well. I said it's cost efficient to hire youths. Doesn't mean we also want to give them, the lowest as much as possible. A lot of them in that age group might have they might have student loans, they might be thinking of the future. So, a lot of them will be considering pay as well. But some of the biggest issues really are around culture and fit. Did the person feel motivated to come to work? Do they feel engaged? Do they feel like they belong? Do they feel like they can have fun and have friends in the workspace? Do they feel that their direct mentors or direct managers are supportive of their career growth? And those are some of the ways. So thinking about that and considering that really are some of the ways to retain them, and also paying them as much as they are worth as well.
Yeah, I think you answered this question that Mohammed asked very nicely. You know what you need to, I saw this question came up. I thought it might be a nice wrap-up question, which is kind of why when I saw it might be from that space. Well, I would like to, and from Workplace Education Manitoba, we would like to thank you very much for sharing, someone's time, sharing your time. They said, but Donna, I shared so much more with you. And it was something I've always remembered. I'd like to thank you for sharing your time, your knowledge, your passion, and just really feeling, I can just feel your warmth today as you were presenting. So that is what I would like to, and Workplace Education Manitoba would like to thank you. So you can stay. I'm just going to add a slide because I just want to let people know about the upcoming options here. So you're going to notice that we have more speakers in this series for you for Skills for Success Unwrapped. And so we hope you'll be able to join us and share these ideas with others. There was one individual who was asking about the PowerPoints. Are we going to be sharing them? I need to just check with check with our presenter. So my apologies, I don't have an answer for that at this time. But I will get back to you with that. We would love to see you. You will see that we've got presentations next week. If you have any questions, please reach out to Mohammed, and he will be able to assist you as he is the managers for this special project. We want to thank you very much for your time today and your attention and your beautiful questions. Have a lovely Friday afternoon. And those of you who may be somewhere else in a different part of the world, have a lovely Saturday potentially, and have a lovely weekend. We will see you soon. Thank you very much, Mercy. We really appreciate your time today.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.